Macromolecules. One snippet here on macromolecules. There are 4 classes of large molecules in your body, and they are, each of them shares some certain functions and structures. And so it's really cool to know what parts of your body are utilizing these 4 different classes of molecules. So for each one, I want you to think about, number 1, what types of atoms make it up, and number 2, what is the function of that structure. And then there's going to be some different names as well, because there's a lot of different names for molecules in your body, but it all comes down to these 4 classes, and that's pretty awesome. So the 4 classes we're going to go over are going to be carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. All right, that is 4. And let's start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have different names that go with them. They are essentially chains of sugars linked together. So if you remember the glucose molecule, which looks like a little hexagon, the glucose hexagon is C6H12O6. And what we do is we stick a bunch of those together in a long chain. It looks like a beaded necklace, so to speak. And then that long chain is now a carbohydrate. Okay? Carbohydrates are all these sugars. There are lots of different ways carbohydrates store up these sugar molecules. And essentially, carbohydrates' function is energy storage. Now in humans, we're going to store them as carbohydrates as one. You can store sugars as a glycogen molecule as well. So those of you in exercise and movement science might be more familiar with glycogen, which is the animal version of energy storage, as compared to the plant version, which is more frequently the carbohydrate structure, okay? Which doesn't save as much space, but if you're a plant, hey, you got tons of space for storing energy, right? We can't exactly carry around an inefficient sack of carbohydrates for energy storage. So we use a more compact molecule called glycogen, right? There are some other functions of carbohydrates, though. Well, let me give you a different name for them first. Because they are chains of sugars, and sugars are called saccharides, we can have a monosaccharide, which is one sugar. We can have a disaccharide, which is 2 sugars bound together. Or we could have a polysaccharide, which is a whole long chain of sugars. So when I say carbohydrate, I include all of these different things in this major class of molecules, all right, which are sugar-based energy storage. Now, what is pretty neat, though, is we can use these for different things. Plants use the polysaccharides, like this chain of sugars. They use a slightly different bond to stick them together, and that bond makes it difficult to be broken apart. And this structure is then still a chain of sugars, same sugars, different bonds holding them together, and it's called cellulose. And cellulose is what brings us these big, tall, strong trees and such. And it's called fiber when you put it in your diet, because human beings, and actually all eukaryotes, none of us can digest cellulose. We can't break it down. The only organisms that can break down cellulose are bacteria. And that's why organisms who eat wood for a living, like termites, right, those organisms have to have bacteria living in their guts that help them break down the wood materials they eat. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to eat them and get any nutrients at all. Okay, those are carbohydrates. Let's see, I'm going to thumb through your book here and take a look. The next class is going to be lipids. Now, I didn't tell you, carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Remember, C6H12O6 is the basic form of a sugar, and that's going to be the core of the of what makes up the carbohydrates. Now when we move into lipids, they're a little bit different. Now remember, lipids are essentially fats, and there are also some other things like steroids, which are communications and hormones and things in the body. Those are lipid based as well. The lipid itself is the classic one that we have is made from carbon and hydrogen chains. They're like a tail of carbon and hydrogens, and at the top of that is a glycerol head. So it has this sort of structure that looks like a little round glycerol thing with either 2 legs, sometimes 3 legs coming off of it, that are hydrogen-carbon tails. Now, the primary function of lipids are going to be storage of energy, again, a very efficient storage, and also it's going to be communication when I talk about steroids and hormones. Now, admittedly, the composition is quite similar to a sugar, lots of carbons and hydrogens. However, they're very distinctly different in the way that they are structured. Those two long tails. Take a look at the image in your text there, and you'll be able to see what one of these looks like. I'll just hold it up for you there. There's the structure of a lipid. Okay, there's the lipids, and you can see on there the lipid glycerol head with these long chains that hang down. Interesting section in my notes for you there to read. I like those little stories that are in there. The next major group I'm going to talk about are going to be proteins. Now, proteins are going to be made of a totally different basic structure. The basic structure of proteins is amino acids. Now, it may not mean anything to you to say amino acid, but there are only 20 kinds of amino acids in the body, and each of them has a different sort of property, like it's positively charged or negatively charged, or it's not charged at all, and they have certain shapes for each amino acid as well. Now, when you bond the amino acids together, the types of bonds that are used are called peptide bonds, and for that reason we call these protein structures polypeptides, because there's many peptide bonds. The thing that links them together is that basic chain that all the amino acids are clinging onto there. That's sort of the string that holds all the beads together. Is a backbone that is all the same types of bonds and the same types of atoms, and they're all nitrogens, and at least we can say that nitrogen and carbon are in there, but nitrogen is really important in the protein component. Because remember, we didn't see a lot of nitrogens in either the fats or in the carbohydrates that we were looking at in the previous two structures. Now, proteins, what they do is they actually have, many proteins are enzymes. Enzymes can cut bonds of other molecules or put other molecules together using bonds, and they're extremely important in breaking down the foods that you eat. There are also enzymes that they accelerate, in general, any chemical reaction is what the definition of an enzyme is. They're a catalyst. But in practice, they can do a lot of different sort of movement functions inside your body. I mean, I'll give you an example of a protein motor in your muscle cells. When your muscles contract, there's a small protein motor, we'll talk about at that point, that when charged with ATP bends this way, and then bends that way, and then bends this way, and can actually, using this method, can crawl along another protein. That is how muscles contract. Okay, so proteins are extremely important. I think that's about enough of those. The last class is going to be the nucleic acids, and there's really only two types of those in your body, and one is DNA and one is RNA. And DNA means deoxy, which means oxygen-free, ribonucleic acid. And ribo is a type of sugar, ribose. Nucleic means it's found in the nucleus, and it's an acid. So deoxyribonucleic acid. Now I'll tell you, I was recently in Ecuador giving a lecture on this, and I was upbraided because I couldn't say it in Spanish. DNA is actually ADN in Espanol. So in chemistry in Spanish, you actually flip the adjective. You know how you say it's my shoe that is red in Spanish. It's shoe red. It's the same in chemistry. So I got it this time. Are you ready? It's ácido desoxirribonucleico. Okay, just in case you wanted to try that on your friend. Ácido desoxirribonucleico. Yeah, just what I wanted to know too. All right, so these are our communication molecules, DNA and RNA, which is just ribonucleic acid. They code for the information that is used to build the proteins. So they're found in the nucleus, and they have the bases A, T, C, and G on them, except RNA has a U replacing the T. But they're fairly simple molecules in their structure. They're very, very long. And they're just a row of these bases, basically, that spell out the code that is then translated to make the protein